Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Find Your Power in the Cloud, Reconciling Business Processes, Collaboration, and Control. My name is Teresa Resick, and I'm the Director of Market Intelligence here at AIIM, and AIIM is your host and producer of today's event. And joining me are Lane Severson from DocuLabs and Rand Wacker from Box. Box is the underwriter of today's webinar, and we thank them very much for their support. And thank you for taking the time to join us today. And before we get started, just let me offer a few tips for participating in today's webinar. And by joining our event live, you can resize the different windows in front of you. I encourage you to open the group chat, and that's listed in the widgets and those list of links across the bottom of the page. And with group chat, you'll be able to chat with each other and with a few of us here at AIIM. Download the resources that we have for you. Do ask questions of the speakers using the Q&A feature throughout our time today. We have some questions that are lined up for discussion during the talk, and please keep putting your questions in there, so we'll either take them as we can going through the presentation, or we'll save them when at the end where we have our general Q&A, where I expect to have about 5 or so minutes to take those extra questions. Also, at the end of the webcast, a survey will open, and I would greatly value your feedback, and the link to that is also in the widgets across the bottom. And this webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted to AIIM.org's Resources Webinars page in just a few days. And now I just want to introduce the speakers that we have with us. Lane Severson is a practice leader in enterprise information management at DocuLabs, and he works with his clients to help them align their technology investments to support business goals and drive value for the enterprise. And in addition, Lane works to cultivate industry thought leadership by writing on the DocuLabs blog and also contributing to CMS Wire. He has more than 10 years of experience in our information management industry. And we also have with us Rand Wacker, and Rand is the VP of Marketing and Head of Industries at Box. And previously, Rand led the enterprise product management at Box for 3 years, building many of their advanced collaboration, content management, and security capabilities. And prior to Box, Rand held product management, marketing, and engineering roles at places like Cisco, Ironport, Amazon, and others. So right now, I'm going to turn things over to Lane Severson of DocuLabs to begin our talk today. Lane?
Thank you, Teresa. And thank you for everyone who's tuned in today and are using some of your time to join us for this conversation. I think it is timely and useful information. Just a quick couple more words about DocuLabs and where we come from to ground this information. We are a third-party strategy consulting firm that has been in the industry for 25 years, and many of the talking points I'll bring up here today are grounded in research that we've done with our client base. That being said, I will move on to the slides here for today and give a little bit of a background for some of the discussion we'll be having, try to give us a foundation or a framework for many of the questions that are being asked in the industry today. Let's talk a little bit first about the evolution of ECM and digital transformation and build a story around that. If you think about where content management came from, initially we were concerned with digitizing paper documents and archiving report information. And the systems that we put together and the skill sets that we put around those things were fairly basic and were primarily about making sure that we had digitized paper processes. As we moved on from that and the industry matured a bit, we were continuing to digitize paper, but also to add some workflow around it, to understand the processes that were related to documents. And that took several different shapes and forms. But for, I think, a lot of organizations, despite the prevalence of large tools like business process automation engines and workflow engines, things of that nature, a lot of us have gotten this work done via email and ad hoc processes that we do internally. And so we've moved on from what we call the paperless manual world, which is where we're using those emails and things like that, to the paperless automated world, where we've begun to actually automate many of the tasks that we depend on. So if I complete an expense form now, I can click submit, and it's going to take that automatically to my manager and perhaps their manager if I've gone over my spending limit and I need further approvals. Those are things that maybe we would have depended on in the past through a manual process passing along via the interoffice mail or email, and is now being done automatically. And we all understand these things, I think, pretty intuitively. And what's happened recently is this idea of being born digital. And this is really where the change has come in and where I think some of the technologies and ideas that we'll discuss later get really exciting. This is where we reimagine the entire process and say, you know what? What if it was never a paper document in the first place? What if we didn't think about the way we moved these documents around or how those processes were constructed? Because originally that depended on there being a receipt or a carbon copy or something of that nature, or an electronic reference to those things. But none of that's necessary anymore. And so what if we just start over and we reimagine our accounting processes, our billing processes, our invoicing, all of these things as primarily digital first capabilities? This has also brought along a lot of changes in the way that we get work done. And so this is just a little bit of a different view of what I've been discussing here, but we've moved from paper documents to electronic documents, then onto web-based platforms as our primary way of interacting with content, mobile, and we're entering a world now where our cars and our light bulbs are also interrelated to the way that we get work done. As we move on into the future then, and we start thinking about, okay, if we are reimagining the world from a digital first standpoint, what does that mean for the way that we transport data inside of an organization? And what is the easiest way to do that? And I think that that's where the future of the document sits. It's not so much as a restraining artifact that this is how we learned to initially create forms and to transmit information, to display presentations and things of that nature. Those were initially more limiting capabilities, but now we can think of them, I think, as in their best use case, they are good at capturing and communicating human consumable information. We're not very good at reading rows and tables as human beings, and we're not really good at understanding intuitively very complex processes. Those are things that should be handed over to machines, and we're beginning to see that. But there is a place for documents and document processing, and that's where we need to have knowledge workers involved, and we need to have editorial involved, and we have lots of human interaction with those types of artifacts. And so I think that is a good guiding principle for the future of what we'll see here. Yeah, there we go. So Rand, I think that you have the next slide here. I apologize.
Oh, yes, no problem. So thank you, Lane, and thank you, Teresa, for hosting us on today's webinar. We really wanted to talk about a couple of these points because, Lane, I loved what you were saying, about that many people are, still using email to get things done. I find that very often, while sometimes super core business processes have been digitized over the years, there's a whole bunch of things that are really important to organizations that fall back to email and spreadsheets and often Post-it notes and things like that. So, one of the things that would love to get your perspective on, Lane, is what has changed about process digitization in the past few years. And, as you look at your spectrum of going from paper-based manual to fully born digital, what have been some of the drivers in those changes?
Yeah, absolutely. So great question. I think I would summarize it by saying two pieces. For one, if you think about the idea of an e-form and the way that we've dealt with that traditionally, a lot of times folks put in data onto a web page or actually typed it into a Word document, and we were still either using a process engine to move that around or using email, like you mentioned. There's transformational moves that we can make there, right, where we just hand the data off to a process engine and the content object itself doesn't move. We don't do anything with that. So that's one thing. But I think what's more interesting even than that is what we're starting to see folks do in cloud content environments, and where we see a rise of rich media assets being used. So as I'm thinking about knowledge management in an organization and how we're going to create standard operating procedures going forwards, I may want to have those documented in a Word document similar to what we've had in the past, or in a wiki file. And those things can very easily now be created in any cloud office suite, and not only created but collaborated on. So we have integrated text and chat capabilities in there. And I think that gets really exciting to be able to have a combined creation and collaboration workspace. It gives creatives and knowledge workers a lot of freedom around those artifacts.
Yeah, definitely. We've seen an evolution where rich media and people doing things like capturing videos and images have been really important. The other thing that I've seen quite a bit is that a lot of the digitization and transformation that companies are going through is driven by their customer base. A lot of customers have different expectations in how they expect to interact with a company. Just take like loan processing as an example. It wasn't that many years ago, and still is in some cases, where you'd kick that off by walking into a bank branch with a ton of physical paper, and they might go through some digitization process on their side. But nowadays, customers, especially as you look at millennials and other folks coming, they expect to have a more mobile, faster, more streamlined process. And so a lot of people are thinking about how can that type of experience extend to everything in their organization, including like employee onboarding, those kinds of things.
Absolutely.
Yep, for sure. So let me move on to some of the pieces that we're seeing, and I'd love your perspective on this. Again, hey everyone, Rand Wacker. I run the Industry Solutions group here at Box. I'm also actually a member of the board of directors of AIIM, and I spent quite a bit of time with people, such as yourselves, out at our conferences and hearing what are some of the concerns and challenges people have. And one of the things that Box sees, which is very similar to what AIIM sees and many folks in the industry are talking about, is definitely digital transformation is really a thing and causing everyone to rethink both their internal and external processes and everything. And what we see is there's really, especially around content and what is important to all of us in information management, is three main areas of pressure. The first is that the operations of the business and how an organization operates is really under a lot of pressure to change and digitize. So the whole notion of working seamlessly with your customers, with your partners, with your vendors, and as I talked about before, that customer expectation of having digital experiences and processes for how they're working with you has been very, very important. Doesn't matter if it's the customer of a bank or an insurance company, if it is a constituent that's trying to work with their local government, or a student at a university. The expectations of interacting more digitally and more automated have really continued to increase. At the same time, employees expect a modern working environment. We see over and over companies who are really seeing the tech stack that they offer their employees to be actually a recruiting and retention need. Organizations that get a reputation for having crummy tools tend to have trouble retaining talent and challenging and being able to bring on new folks, because folks are expecting nowadays something more like their home experience and the apps they have on their own device. They want that type of experience at work as well. And then finally, as many of us in information management know, the security and privacy regulations continue to abound and require us to really make sure that we're keeping a pace of everything that's going on in the compliance world and meeting all those regulatory environments. So some of the barriers that we see to this challenge is just the fragmentation that has happened in our overall IT stacks and content architectures over time. we all are familiar with the, sort of the beginnings of network shares and team drives, and people having to use email attachments for sharing files. It's a very old school way of doing things, but unfortunately still persists as one of the primary ways that people are collaborating internally. But then from there, we had the evolution of the enterprise content management space. Products which were designed for more structured processes and maintaining content that had regulatory policy around it. Those systems were great for some core processes in an organization, but they haven't necessarily kept pace with the evolution to a mobile world and the requirements for building these new digital experiences. Another silo that we see very often are sync and share silos. So individual tools like Microsoft OneDrive or Google Drive, which are really used to back end a productivity suite and be sort of your hard drive in the cloud. What we often see is that people will get siloed there, but then have to move on, to sharing stuff over SharePoint or externally, even passing things, over email continually and those kinds of things. And then two other silos that we see popping up are people building new applications in infrastructure as a service providers like Amazon, Google, and Azure. These are great places to build customer-facing apps, but if the content is not connected to your internal users, you have yet another silo. And then the new SaaS applications and some of the best-of-breed tools like Slack and Salesforce and Workday are creating yet more silos. So the challenge here, when I put this slide up, most CIOs, IT teams, and especially their records teams really start to understand the complexity of their environment and the challenges that it causes for users being able to find the information they need, a lot of the fragmentation of a process, and then sometimes the inconsistency in security and governance across that. And that's exacerbated by the whole notion of if you really think about a process and how information is created and managed throughout an organization, the fact that you usually have to go from system to system. So you might create a document and then either start storing that on your hard drive or in sort of your personal share. But then if you need to pass that out to a team, you're then going into another application, or you're kicking it off in a process in a content management tool or something like that. But then if you have to share it externally, you need another tool. Finally, if you're publishing it to customers, it goes somewhere else. This sort of fragmentation is what's causing just really some of the real problems in speeding up processes and rethinking your environment in a digital way. And so, Lane, I'd love to talk a little bit more about some of the departmental use cases and some of the places where you're seeing organizations getting returns from digitizing existing processes, which may not be the foremost ones people are thinking about, but they're seeing really huge ROI.
Yeah, so, if you think about kind of the classic cases that get thrown around a lot, and they get thrown around with good reason. We already talked about loan processing, customer onboarding gets talked about a lot, account updating, things of that nature are discussed, very frequently. And there's good reason. There's big dollar amounts around it. It drives business process and company revenues. One of a couple of the items that are used on a regular day-to-day basis, though, and have a lot of impact on folks that we would call knowledge workers are, simpler tasks like, working together as part of a team to summarize a project and to create a management presentation, to distribute that presentation, and then finally to store it for reference for, future use cases. That is a very common use case that folks do on a regular basis, but often through a lot of rework, through a lot of back and forths that lose time, perhaps resources change roles or move on even during those processes. So we see some of those things that should be maybe a couple of weeks of preparation turning into several months at a time, and that's just one area where you can see knowledge workers increasing their productivity through the use of, digitizing a process and using digital forms of communication.
Yep. Yeah, we see a bunch of really interesting examples for internal departments. For example, HR and people teams. We've seen a lot of companies get a lot of value out of starting to digitize employee records and being able to set retention policies automatically. Being able to automate their onboarding process. Last time when I joined Box, the entire offer letter and all the collection of all my personal data was done through e-signature tools and submission through secure portals of all my paperwork and everything. Then we're also seeing finance and legal teams, for example, using these tools to streamline vendor management and onboarding and contract negotiations. Again, getting out of that email-based process or, gosh forbid, some of the paper-based and fax-based processes that some folks are still using. So what we're really seeing is, go ahead, please.
Well, I was just going to say, another one that I'd referenced earlier, but I think is a real big use case for folks is standard operating procedures. And, it's very prevalent in manufacturing. It's very prevalent in the utilities industry. But, we also have SOPs that exist in banking, financial services, and insurance, which I know as I'm looking at the attendee list, we have a bunch of folks here in those areas. One of the things about SOPs that is interesting is they really are not static documents, and they do give us the foundational understanding of how processes at least should be getting done. In the past, when they were paper-based and kind of printed out and put in 3-ring binders and held on a shelf somewhere, they didn't reflect the accuracy of what was really being done very well, and so they weren't great for training new folks as they came into an office environment or into a new use case. Now with, the more flexible environments that we have in digital authoring and collaboration, we see these documents being updated much more regularly, reflecting real processes, and it gives us a lot of gains as we begin to pull that through the process, the digitization of processes. It is pretty interesting.
Yeah, I totally agree. Because, like SOPs and things like that, they are really iterative and living documents. But there has to be structure and governance around how they are created, how they're updated, and how they're published. And that's something I think that's, missed often in the planning process, but you can get huge benefits out of. And in fact, that's brings me. It's a good segue to the one of our next slides, which is this is something a framework that Box has been working on with a lot of customers around the maturity of their use of content and a way to think that can break you out of the fragmentation and silo world of the past. Because what we've seen is that if you walk through this and think about baseline easiest enablement for users is their individual productivity. How do I get access to my files wherever I am and be able to use those sort of on an individual basis? Then moving on to being able to enable teams to collaborate and share files and folders across both internal and external groups. But where it really gets powerful is the ability to really create those collaborative business processes. And this could be like the SOP updates. This can be the HR onboarding. But what are the really high-value departmental use cases that don't necessarily need a fully customized process like insurance claims or loan processing that you might have done with an ECM system, but are beyond some of the basic team site collaboration tools? Again, SOPs is a really good example. It's multiple documents, multiple people, and multiple steps. And how can you automate and streamline those across the organization? But what we're really going to get to, and Lane, I might ask for some of your thoughts on an area that we haven't touched on yet, which is automation and the use of AI to really create these intelligent processes. And so one of the things that we've been doing and seeing, I've got a couple of customer examples, is that machine learning tools and other AI systems that are able to extract insights and metadata from documents can be used to actually speed up and even really improve the the pace of these processes. You, I know, talk a lot about RPA and other systems when it comes to AI. Could you give us a couple thoughts about what our opportunities are here?
Yeah, absolutely. So the world of AI, the most exciting part of it is that it's already becoming transformational for organizations, and we're really only skimming the surface, right? And so the real powerful kind of deep learning, redundant neural networks, all of those types of things aren't being released in sort of full scale in enterprise evaluations yet. But if you look at what's being done at the academic environment and other places, that gets really exciting. I think for where we see it being used today in prime time, there's a couple different places. One is the tools are getting much better at being able to crawl, break open, and understand content objects, especially if those content objects are text-based. It's a little more difficult for video and audio files, rich media, things of that nature. But if there's structured or semi-structured text-based documents, like most of our content is, those analytics tools are very good at now being able to read those documents and give us some intelligence about them. What kind of document is it? Does it contain certain elements that might be a security or privacy risk for my clients? Should they be handled in a different manner? And being able to hand that metadata off then to some of our process engines to say, hey, maybe this document shouldn't be living in this space. Maybe we need to change the security permissions around this or things of that nature. That's one use case that we're seeing a lot of. Another is more on the sentiment analysis side of the world, where we're using these tools to understand when we get a letter from a client or an inquiry, can we do some pre-qualification around that to help our customer service or our sales folks out understand, hey, these are inquiries where the client is excited about an opportunity, and so we really need to jump on it quickly, or they're deeply upset, and so we really need to make sure that we get this problem solved quickly. Those are some of the use cases that are happening today that are pretty powerful and are being released on a regular basis.
Yeah. So I'm seeing everything from, very broad use of ML, from doing basic OCR to image tagging to, really specialized capabilities for, extracting all of the fields from shipping invoices and bills of lading and those kinds of things. So really cool. I was going to share a couple of audience or a couple of customer examples that speak to these. Feel free to weigh in any thoughts that you have. But one of the ones that I like to highlight is Broadcom, which is a growing technology company here in the Bay Area. They are a great example of someone that didn't necessarily have ECM as a core function in their organization, but has gotten a lot of value out of streamlining many of those processes internally with the finance and the vendor management team. And so this was a case where they actually, created a portal. They actually were just using Box natively. They didn't have to create any custom application or anything, but they were using it as a process for bringing multiple vendors on board, being able to share and keep track of the latest bonds and contracts, and since they are a public company, being able to retain those under necessary rules for Sarbanes-Oxley and stuff. This is on top of a huge amount of savings they had in standardizing their overall content infrastructure, replacing NFS systems, replacing team drives, and all those kinds of things. Going to a slightly more advanced one, and I'm sure, Lane, you've been dealing with a number of companies in the insurance space. Allstate is one of those companies that's actually rethinking the customer experience and built, for example, and released, you can actually find it on the app stores now, a digital locker application that allows you to go around and take pictures of everything in your house or apartment and upload it to them for insurance purposes. What's really interesting is as some of these ML engines that we were talking about get better at identifying not just types of appliances, but actually identifying models and manufacturers, they're able to automate the process of actually creating a cost, replacement cost, and assessing the risk they have for individual systems. So this is an area where they're not only able to improve the customer experience by giving them easy tools for keeping track of what may be covered in an insurance claim, but actually on the back end significantly optimizing their ability to assess what sort of risk they have out there, making sure that everyone is fully taken care of. I don't know if you've seen anything like that.
Yeah, so we're seeing a lot of interest in this, and it's what for lack of a better term, maybe I talk about it as kind of an external document collaboration capability where an organization is trying to provide a way for digital uploads for their clients, or sometimes for folks that serve their clients. So another example would be if you think about the wealth management environment, or things like tax prep, or things of that nature, where you would have multiple professionals, perhaps a banker, a lawyer, and an accountant, all working on a process for an individual, but those folks, the banker, accountant, and lawyer, don't work for the same company. So how do you provide a digital environment for them to share and store documents for a single client and collaborate on them together? That's a big need in the marketplace, and we see a lot of folks looking at a similar use case to what you shared around the Allstate example to provide that as well.
Yeah, we're working with a number of clients, and doing something like that doesn't require building a custom application or a custom portal. It can, as long as you've got the security components in place and the ability to enable that collaboration across those different groups, you can do that out of the box with many systems like what Box provides and everything. So, really interesting ideas here. I thought, Lane, I might pass it back to you, since you guys at DocuLab spend so much time consulting with clients on how to get started here, and get any thoughts you have on where people might get started in some of this digitization.
Thanks, Rand. So what we talk to people about is they're taking a look at their environment for digitization is, you start out taking a look at it and saying, okay, what are the main drivers in my organization to get a project done? And this is not the same for every organization. So it's easy to come out and say, well, we'll go for the low-hanging fruit. What may be low-hanging fruit in your organization might be different than another. And so I tell folks to evaluate their opportunities this way. Look at the opportunity for hard dollar ROI. What can you prove your savings around, either through a reduction in operational expense or a improvement in customer experience? We can talk a little bit about that too. So that would be, what is the value that you're going to get out of digitizing this process? Number two would be, what's the risk reduction that you're going to have around this from a regulatory standpoint, and how is that going to drive the priority of this project? And then there might be other categories that you would want to include for your organization. So perhaps there's a line of business that's particularly influential, and they have projects that really need to get pushed through and would really benefit from a digitization opportunity. Perhaps there's a big push from not necessarily your primary regulatory concerns, the stuff that we all face every day, but a board of directors mandate that we want to be ahead of the curve in protecting our clients' privacy, and that's going to be a competitive advantage for our organization. So as you're thinking about the opportunities you have in front of you, don't just think about the tooling, although that's important, and don't just think about maybe what's the biggest and most exciting thing, but think about what are those drivers and levers in your organization. Just kind of plot out a rubric around those and begin to rank them that way. I think you find a lot more successful projects that take those multifaceted evaluation of what we're getting done into play as they're looking at their opportunities.
Yeah, and again, looking, I think a lot of folks may be in working in IT and may, have an idea of some of the core processes in the business, but reaching across the lines to some of the other groups that are as important, but maybe you may not think of as a process team, if it's the SOP management you talked about before, or sales productivity, the HR team, those kinds of things. So. Very good. I want to encourage folks to ask any questions you have through the Q&A tool in ON24. we'll have some time near the end. One of the wrap-up areas that we wanted to discuss, Lane, was around measuring outcomes. So you talked about how to prioritize and find what are the right departments to go after. What have you found people use as sort of their rubric for measuring success after these process projects?
Yeah, so this is interesting, and we talked a little bit about this yesterday as we were preparing for this presentation. But there's definitely been a change in the way that organizations assess their success criteria. And so in the past, if you looked at that diagram that I had up earlier, when we were primarily working on digitizing a business process, and if you think about early digitization of mortgage processes, for example, we got a lot of savings for big mortgage processors just by getting rid of the paper, and instead of shipping paper from branches to central scanning locations and, from client locations all over the country. Folks will remember, most of us here, on September 11th when all the flights stopped, there were checks that were stopped all over the country, and that was really the beginning of the big check digitization process, right? And so the same thing happened around mortgage documents, but the point there is that the savings we saw was a real dollar savings. Banks stopped spending so much money on transportation costs for paper documents, and they saved actual dollars in the ledger book. What's changed now is, and that used to be called hard savings, we used to call soft savings things like user experience or customer experience or whatnot. It's really surprising because I hear clients now and even business managers talk about customer experience as a hard ROI, a hard dollar ROI, because the way that they're doing their accounting or the power that their marketing department has, maybe one of the two, really has pushed customer experience to that level. So I hear a lot of folks saying, hey, it's not so much about whether or not we're going to save $1 per document because we're not shipping it anymore. It's much more about, am I going to gain and retain customers for my line of business? And I know that I have to do that in a digital environment, right? So that discussion has changed dramatically.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that it's very much the opportunity to grow the business as much as saving individual dollars. And one other item that I would highlight also is employee experience. We're finding a lot of companies really starting to measure the NPS or the employee satisfaction with IT tools now. And they're finding in some cases, systems they've had in place for a long time or which were the corporate standard are really a hindrance to people getting their job done in an efficient manner. So they're looking for ways to improve that, both to speed up the organization as well as to deal with some of the retention issues that I talked about before. So Lane, any other thoughts as we move into the Q&A? And Teresa, maybe you could open up the Q&A portal. Again, folks, it's on 24. You're able to submit questions there. We're having a few come in, but any other thoughts before we move on to the Q&A, Lane?
The one thing that popped into my mind around that discussion we were having around kind of the drivers for digitization, and you discussed the employee experience. I wrote an article last year talking about the drivers for digital transformation, and one of them is the mess of legacy applications that we have in organizations, to the point where if you go out and look at publications like the New York Times and others that will track what major executives are doing, you see folks leaving big brand name organizations that are household names because getting digital transformation done there is very difficult with the embedded legacy applications. It's actually a lot easier to start from scratch, and the cloud-based applications are so easy to stand up and get going. So it's really fascinating to see kind of what used to be a benefit for these big organizations has become a little bit of a stumbling block for them.
Interesting. Yeah. Teresa, what do we have in the questions bucket?
We have a number of really good questions in here, and so I'm just going to dive right into them. One of the things, it's how do you encourage people to stop using email if that's what they're used to using for collaboration activities. Realize it's a whole lot of change management type of thinking around this. So what are some thoughts or tips? Lane, let me start with you.
Yeah. Okay, so the first thing you have to do to get folks to stop using email for a process is to, you start out small and, you think about a defined work environment. So, for this task that this team is going to do, we're not going to use emails for it. We're only going to communicate via Microsoft Teams, for example. Say that's what we're using. And you lead it from a team leadership or a management level perspective. But it has to start small, and it has to start around very well-defined use cases. And then you begin to mature that out from there. It is a huge issue, though, that folks face because it's not easy to answer the question at a global level, what should I use a collaboration system for and what should I use an email system for? That becomes too difficult. I think it's a much more answerable question when it's done at the departmental or the process level. That's what we've seen to be successful.
Yeah, I totally agree that you've got to attack it at the departmental and process level. And something that we found works well is if it's sort of like Newton's law, one of Newton's laws of physics, like content in email tends to stay in email. So if you can start it in another form, that's really helpful. And one of the things we see is people will digitize a process at the edges. And, for example, take employee information. If you're able to capture that employee information, through an app or through a phone, making it digital from the beginning, and then actually running it through a process and something other than email, starting inbox or something like that, that tends to keep things much more organized and structured rather than the Wild West that is our email inbox.
I have another question in here, and actually it's relating directly to some thoughts that I jotted down listening as you guys were speaking. Because at one point, Rand, you were mentioning like where the IT teams are crossing into other departments to work on process improvement initiatives. And I know I've been reading a lot about the value of the cross-functional teams or centers of excellence. It's how a lot of organizations are labeling that. And someone specifically is asking here about, how can the records management group be more involved in the IT department's decisions to move to the cloud when there's already silos and processes in place, but like when an IT group is excluding another group like records, and just some thoughts and strategies of like how to catch up to get to that cross-functional cooperation so that these initiatives can be successful. And again,
definitely.
Lane, let me start with you.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Lane.
Well, Rand, let's go ahead. Start with you on this one. Go ahead.
Well, sorry. Yeah, I was eager on this one because this tends to be one of the most common conversation points at the AIIM conference, which is how can you improve collaboration between the records management teams and the IT teams, and making sure they understand what's going on here. And I think that one of the biggest pieces is organizational structure, and having teams reporting into or working directly together is so critical. Too often the IT teams are making a decision based on a technical need without either understanding what is the business requirement and what is the compliance requirements. And so building those cross-functional groups, and sometimes having the records team report into IT so that IT leadership understands what those challenges are, I think is really important. Lane, you've got a lot of experience with some of these organizational issues. What would be your thoughts here?
Yeah, so there's a big struggle around this right now, and I think that what we're moving from is, we had this big shift in industry where we were pushing towards a centralized model for doing our content management, And I think we pushed that model really far. We found a lot of the edges of it, and we realized that it wasn't sustainable, especially for really, really big organizations with really, really complex tasks. And so what we've seen a push back on then is what we're describing right now is siloed content or siloed information. But what I think, if we are able to do strategy correctly and to get business and IT on the same page, could be more of a best-of-breed approach where we're choosing the right tool for the right job. And the hard work there is that, we can't just depend on the technology to help us define where the edges of those processes are, what all the needs are there, and, what do we do about areas where there's overlapping capabilities. I think that's a big frustration for IT folks. And when you're on the business side, you really don't care what those overlaps in capability or technology are. You just want it to work right, and you see a tool that works really well, and you want to do it that way. The path forward here, I think, is going to be IT leadership sitting down and thinking about, how do we manage a best-of-breed category where we can serve the needs of our line of business partners, perhaps by just providing the platform or the orchestration layers to get this work done, and to give them a lot more freedom around kind of what Lego block pieces they want to start plugging in to make it look and feel the way they want it to.
And I want to squeeze in one more question. There are so many really good questions here, and I'm trying to get to as many of them as we can. So this other really cool question, tips and suggestions. What systems do you suggest to help scale down the variety of platforms that companies use? This one person in particular is talking about in her own organization that they use Outlook and SharePoint and Google Drive and Workday and how many other people have how many other kinds of repository and collaborative repositories to use. Some thoughts on how to scale down or streamline the workflows without affecting productivity when we're working with all of these multiple silos, for that kind of integration. Lane, let's start with you with some of your thoughts on this.
Okay, so
it's a huge question, I know.
It's a really big question, and it's something that historically organizations will get excited about, begin to start doing, and then not finish, and end up in a worse place than they have been before. And so a lot of times, if you've ever cleaned your garage, I just got done doing this, so it's springtime here in Chicago. So when you clean your garage, you get all excited about it, you're going to get all organized, you haul all of the stuff out of your garage, you sweep out, and now you got the second half where you got to put everything back in the right place, and it's a disaster. And if you're me, you end up leaving a bunch of it in your driveway until Sunday or something like that. That's the equivalent of what we do in IT when we try to rationalize some of these systems. So I'm not optimistic that we're going to get this one right anytime soon, and the ROI around it is tough. There's a lot of technical debt there. We've already invested in these tools. They are being used. What I think we're going to end up doing is we'll see a rise of what the analysts are calling iPaaS or integration in the cloud, essentially, where you've got platform services that will orchestrate all of the different repositories and presentation layers that we have existing in our organization, and we'll try to get it right by involving an orchestration layer of some sort of that type. I wish I could go into this in more detail, but it's another hour-long conversation, and it's something that's really worth talking about, perhaps in another webinar, Teresa.
It sounds like a plan. But Rand, your thoughts on some of this?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I agree that it's a big challenge. I've got a slightly different view in that I don't know that we necessarily have to solve the problem fully and replace all the underlying systems, but one of the things that we have found to be really important is to hold vendors accountable for openness so that you can integrate these systems, particularly to do two things. One is make sure the users are able to use the tools that are most important to them. So Workday, if they're using Workday, that's important. If they want to use Microsoft Teams, that's important. But a lot of companies also would offer Slack as an alternative to Teams, or they might let people use both Office and Google Drive or something like that. So being able to have an open platform So let users choose the application they want, but then have a common data layer is really, really valuable, because then you can do a lot of things like have common security and governance. You can actually interconnect processes between these applications. And as more and more AI tools get deployed to increase your visibility into your information, you can use that and surface that. So I think that it is a ongoing journey, but the drive towards openness is really critical as we're talking about this new modern cloud stack of applications.
Okay. We're getting really close to the end of the webinar time, and I just want to have up here the contact information for you to be able to reach out to our speakers. And when you download the PDF of the presentation, you'll have all of this. And also, and I just had up there Lane's contact information. Rand, I know that Box has another webcast coming up in a few weeks here, and just wanted to let you have the opportunity to describe what this is so that others can join that.
Yes, so we're really excited to be releasing a brand new tool called Box Relay, which builds on a number of automation and workflow capabilities that Box has had for a number of years, but basically makes it possible for business teams to create their own automated workflows and simple processes to do things that we've talked about, everything from HR automation to more complex business applications for customers. And so we'll be talking about that and unveiling a lot of the awesome capabilities June 5th, about the same time of day as this webinar.
And if you just look to the resources list that's to the right of the slide area, there's a link right there to register for the webinar. And if you just click that, it's going to open another browser tab, and you can finish registering after we're done with the webinar here. But also, when you, like I said, when you download the slides, the PDF of the slides, the link is in this document there. And just one other thing, just to remind everyone, hopefully you're all aware that AIIM offers a whole bunch of training opportunities. We have live instructor-led training as well as online self-paced classes on a wide variety of topics. We can even arrange for trainers to come to your place of business and provide that custom perspective. And we also have AIIM's Certified Information Professional, and that's a certification that's dedicated to enhancing and promoting the profession of information management. And one of our classes is called the Fundamentals of Intelligent Information Management. And it's not only a really helpful overview of all things IIM, it's also an excellent review to prepare for the CIP exam. So consider that. But just to get some more information on that, go to aim.org/training, and a whole lot of information in there about the different classes that we offer. Just want to remind everyone that we have recorded this webcast, and we'll email a link out to you so that you can come back, listen to it again, invite others to listen to it, download the resources. Please take the feedback survey. I really do read every one of those responses that you put in there. I would very much like to thank our underwriter, Box. Without the support from our solution providers, we wouldn't be able to bring you these free educational programs like our webinars. So thank you, Box, for your sponsorship and support. And as we bring this webinar to a close, I just want to leave you with the closing thoughts of each of our speakers. And I'm going to start first with Lane Severson from DocuLabs. Your closing thoughts today.
So my closing thought is, as records managers or as IT folks, I think a lot of times we can get frustrated with the line of business for creating shadow IT, shadow processes, shadow content archives, things of that nature. And what I would encourage you, as I encourage a lot of my clients to do, is to see those as ready-made opportunities. These are needs that the line of business has, perhaps politically or otherwise they've gone about solving the problem the wrong way. But it's an opportunity for us to identify where we need to put in some work, where we need to create a defined use case and help provide some more service in that space. And so let's try to flip the view of some of those things and begin to see those as opportunities that we can go out after.
Thank you, Lane.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. I think that's really awesome. What we were going back to the ROI conversation before. I met recently with an IT team that had said that while ROI and business outcomes are important, one of the things they started measuring is the number of high fives they get as an IT team going down the halls and people being really happy with the tools that they've deployed. So understanding that and helping people get their job done is one of the things that can really help make us heroes.
And thank you. That was Rand Wacker from Box. Thank you, everyone, for your time today. That is the end of our webcast. For AIM, this is Teresa Resick, and we will see you next time. And have a really good day.